You usually don't think about the darkness until you're truly in it. I don't mean the dark of your bedroom when you flip the switch, or the dim streets of a suburb after midnight. I mean the heavy, suffocating blackness of the Appalachian wilderness, 3 days hike from the nearest paved road, with nothing but a dying flashlight in your shaking hand. That kind of dark doesn't just hide things. It feels like it creates them. My name is Alex. I've been a search and rescue officer, SAR for short, working the deep trails of the Appalachians for the better part of 5 years. I took this job because I loved the outdoors. I loved the smell of pine needles baking in the summer sun, the crunch of frost under my boots in the winter, the idea of being the guy who brings a lost kid home to their parents. I thought I knew these mountains. I thought I respected them. But respect implies you understand what you're dealing with. You don't understand these woods. Nobody does. We just survive them shift by shift, rule by rule. And I'm not talking about the standard safety protocols. I'm not talking about bring extra water or don't separate from your partner. I'm talking about the other rules. The list they give you on your first night, printed on a crinkled, yellowing piece of printer paper that looks like it's been photocopied 1,000 times. The list they tell you to memorize, then burn. The night I got the list, the station felt colder than usual. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights in the break room were buzzing, that low-frequency hum that drills right into your temples when you're running on caffeine and sleep deprivation. My training officer, a guy we called Mac, skin like leather, eyes that never seemed to blink enough, sat across from me. He slid a folded paper across the metal table. He didn't look at me. He was staring at the window, staring at the reflection of the room against the black void outside. "Read it," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "Read it, Alex, and don't ask me why. Just do exactly what it says. If you don't, well, we won't be searching for you. We'll just mark you as absent." I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought it was hazing, some rookie initiation rite to spook the new guy from the city. I unfolded the paper. There were 7 rules typed out in a stark courier font. Rule 1. If you hear your name called from the canopy, do not look up. Rule 2. If you see a staircase in the woods, do not approach it, do not touch it, and for the love of God, do not climb it. Rule 3. The brown bears are shy. If you see a bear walking on its hind legs that doesn't seem shy, run. Do not scream, just run. I stopped reading there and looked at Mac, a smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. I asked him if this was a joke. I asked him if I should expect Bigfoot to pop out of the supply closet. Mac didn't smile. He finally turned those unblinking eyes toward me, and the look in them, it made the saliva dry up in my mouth instantly. It was a look of pure, unadulterated pity. He reached over, tapped the paper, and pointed to rule number 4. Rule 4. If your flashlight begins to flicker, turn it off immediately. Do not change the batteries. Do not hit it against your palm. Turn it off, sit on the ground, and close your eyes. Count to 60. If you feel heat on your face, do not open your eyes until you hear the birds singing. That was the one that got me. It was so specific, so bizarre. But I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and nodded. I didn't believe it. Not really. Not until 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday, overcast, the air thick with humidity and the smell of upcoming rain. We had a call for a missing hiker, a guy in his 40s who had gone off-trail near a ridge known as Devil's Drop. I was separated from Mac, sweeping a sector of dense hemlock forest. The sun had set hours ago. The darkness in the Appalachians is different. The canopy is so thick it blocks out the stars, the moon, everything. It's like being inside a velvet bag. I was moving slow, scanning the brush. The only sound was the rhythm of my own breathing and the snap of dry twigs under my boots. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was the absence of sound. The insects, the wind in the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. It all just stopped. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the world. The silence was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums, creating a dull ache. And then my flashlight flickered. It was a high-end tactical light, fresh batteries, reliable as hell. But the beam sputtered. It dimmed to a weak, sickly yellow glow, barely cutting 3 feet into the dark. The shadows of the trees suddenly seemed to stretch, elongating, reaching toward me like spindly, desperate fingers. I remembered the list. I remembered Mac's face. Logic told me it was a loose connection. Logic told me to smack the light, shake it, fix it. But my gut was screaming in a primal language I hadn't spoken since I was a child, afraid of the monster under the bed. The air around me grew warm, not humid warm, but radiant heat, like standing next to an open oven door. My hand trembled. The weak beam of light cast long, dancing shadows against the trunks of the ancient hemlocks. And in that dying light, in the periphery of my vision, I saw something standing between 2 trees. It was tall, too tall, pale like birch bark but smooth, and it was watching me. I didn't look directly at it. Couldn't. My body froze, locking up in a way that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with prey response. The flashlight flickered again, almost dying completely, leaving me with just a faint ember of illumination. The heat on my face intensified. It smelled like ozone and wet dog. Turn it off. Mac's voice echoed in my head. Turn it off immediately. My thumb hovered over the rubber switch. Every instinct I had as a human being rebelled against the idea of voluntarily plunging myself into total darkness with that thing standing 10 yards away. To turn off the light was to surrender. To turn off the light was to admit I was helpless. But the rule number 4. I heard a sound then, a soft, wet clicking noise. Click, click, click. Coming from the direction of the pale shape. It sounded like teeth snapping together. I shut my eyes tight. I jammed my thumb down on the button. The click of the flashlight switch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Darkness. Absolute, total darkness. I dropped to the ground, curling my legs to my chest, wrapping my arms around my head. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. I could hear footsteps. They weren't heavy thuds like boots. They were soft, sliding sounds. Something was dragging itself over the dead leaves. Asterisk shoe. SHHH. SHHH. Asterisk. 4, 5, 6. The heat was right in front of me now. I could feel it radiating against my forehead, my cheeks. It felt like someone was holding a space heater inches from my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up and run blindly into the night. But I kept counting. I forced the numbers out of my mind, mouthing them silently. 7, 8, 9. Something brushed against my shoulder. Felt like dry, brittle straw. A hand? A claw? I didn't flinch. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I didn't move a muscle. I became a statue, a part of the forest floor. 10, 11. A voice whispered. It was right next to my ear. It didn't sound human. It sounded like leaves rustling together to form words. A mimicry of speech that lacked any soul or cadence. Alex, it whispered. Rule 1, do not look up. Rule 1 didn't apply here, but the principle was the same. Don't acknowledge it. Don't engage. Alex, look at me. The voice changed. It shifted pitch. Suddenly, it didn't sound like leaves. It sounded like Mac. It sounded exactly like Mac. Alex, it's clear. Turn your light on, kid. You're freaking me out. My hand twitched toward the flashlight. It was Mac. He had found me. He was standing right there. Relief washed over me, hot and sudden. Of course, it was just Mac. But I was only on 17. Alex, open your eyes. Come on. The heat was still there. Mac didn't radiate heat like a furnace. And Mac was scanning the ridge 3 miles east. There was no way he could have crossed the ravine in 20 minutes. I squeezed my eyes shut so hard I saw stars exploding behind my eyelids. I clamped my hands over my ears. I restarted the count. 1, 2, 3. The voice turned angry. It wasn't Mac anymore. It was a guttural, grinding noise like stones crushing bone. A low growl that vibrated through the ground and into my chest. The air grew stiflingly hot, making sweat run down my back in icy rivulets. The smell of ozone was overpowering, mixing with the copper scent of old blood. I sat there in the dark, a grown man, a trained officer, curled in a ball while something paced circles around me. I counted to 60. Then I counted to 60 again. And again. I counted until numbers lost their meaning, until time dissolved into a singular, terrifying moment of endurance. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, maybe. Eventually, the heat faded. The oppressive silence began to crack. Cricket chirped. Then another. The wind picked up, rustling the canopy above. And finally, faint and gray through my eyelids, I sensed the dawn. I opened my eyes. I was alone. The woods were gray and misty, the morning light filtering through the trees in soft, harmless beams. My flashlight lay on the ground next to me. I went to pick it up. That's when I saw the batteries. They weren't just dead. They were corroded. White acid had leaked out of the casing, eating through the metal, as if they had aged 100 years in a single night. And all around me, in the soft mud of the forest floor, there were footprints. But they weren't boot prints, and they weren't bear tracks. They looked like human hands, pressed deep into the mud, fingers elongated and broken, circling the spot where I had sat, round and round and round. I walked back to the station in silence. I didn't radio in. I just walked. When I got back, Mac was standing by the coffee pot. He looked at me, saw the mud on my uniform, saw the hollow look in my eyes. He didn't ask what happened. He just poured a cup of black coffee and slid it across the table. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning," I replied. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. That was 3 years ago. I'm still here. I still patrol these woods. I still look for the lost. But I never, ever forget the rules. Especially when the sun goes down and the shadows start to stretch. Because out here, the darkness isn't empty. It's waiting. And if you don't follow the rules, if you get curious, if you let that single, weak light source guide you into places you shouldn't go, well, you might find what you're looking for. And trust me, you don't want to. So, if you're ever hiking in the Appalachians and you see a staircase or hear your name or your flashlight starts to flicker, don't be a hero. Just remember my story. Remember the heat. And for God's sake, keep your eyes closed. You know, looking back at it now, sitting here in the safety of my living room with the warm glow of a desk lamp pushing back the shadows, it's hard to explain why I didn't leave immediately. It's hard to justify why I took the job in the first place. I guess when you're in your late 20s and the corporate grind has chewed you up and spit you out, the idea of vanishing into the wilderness feels less like a danger and more like a solution. I wanted quiet. I wanted solitude. I wanted to feel like I was doing something that actually mattered, something tangible. Search and rescue seemed like the answer, felt noble, heroic even. I applied to a station deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I won't say exactly where, mostly because I don't want anyone going out there looking for proof. The Appalachians are old. Geologists say they are older than the Atlantic Ocean, older than bones, older than Saturn's rings. When you stand in the middle of them, you can feel that age. Presses down on you. It watches you. But back then, during the interview process, I just saw it as beautiful. I saw endless rolling green hills, the mist clinging to the valleys in the mornings, the way the sun dappled through the canopy in the afternoon. It looked peaceful. It looked like the perfect place to reset my life. The hiring process was strangely expedited. I had the physical fitness, I had the medical certifications from a brief stint as an EMT years ago, and I knew my way around a compass. That was enough for the chief. He was a man named Miller, a guy who looked like he had been carved out of the granite of the mountains himself. His skin was leathery. His eyes were always scanning the perimeter of the room, and he had this permanent exhaustion etched into his face. Not the kind of tired you get from missing a night of sleep. It was a soul-deep weariness. I remember the day I arrived at the station. It was late September, that golden time of year when the air starts to get crisp and the leaves are just thinking about turning. The station itself was a converted ranger's lodge, essentially a large, sturdy cabin tucked away at the end of a 12-mile gravel road. It didn't look ominous. It looked cozy. Inside, the lighting was soft and amber, coming from mismatched floor lamps and the glow of the radio equipment in the corner. It smelled like pine cleaner, old paper, and strong coffee. It was aggressively normal. Felt like visiting a grandfather's house. That was the deceptive calm. That was the trap. Miller showed me around. He pointed out the bunk room, the kitchen, the equipment locker. He walked me through the standard protocols. How to triangulate a radio signal, how to pack a med kit for trauma versus exposure, how to read the topographical maps that covered the walls like wallpaper. It was all standard. It was mundane. It was exactly what I had signed up for. Then we sat down at the scarred wooden table in the break room. The sun was setting outside, casting long, lazy shadows across the floorboards. The dust motes were dancing in the light. It was quiet, peaceful. Miller poured 2 mugs of black coffee, slid one over to me, and then pulled a folded piece of paper out of his breast pocket. He didn't look at me. He looked at the paper. He smoothed it out on the table with a hand that trembled just slightly. "Alex," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You're a smart kid. I can tell. You're capable. But out here, being smart and being capable aren't always enough. The woods are different here." I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. I expected a speech about bears or sudden weather changes or the dangers of dehydration. I was ready for the safety lecture. "This is the most important piece of gear I'm giving you," Miller said, tapping the paper. "This isn't in the manual. This isn't official Forestry Service policy. If you show this to the brass downtown, they'll laugh at you. They'll tell you it's hazing. They'll tell you the old guys are just trying to scare the rookie." He finally looked up, locking eyes with me. The intensity in his gaze made me put the mug down. "It is not a joke," he said. "Read it. Memorize it. Live by it. If you break a leg out there, I can come get you. If you get lost, we can find you. But if you break these rules, there isn't a damn thing anyone can do for you." He stood up abruptly and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the warm, amber light of the kitchen with a piece of crinkled paper. I remember chuckling nervously. I really did think it was a prank. Every workplace has its rituals for the new guy. The left-handed screwdriver, the blinker fluid. I figured this was the SAR version. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't typed on a computer. It looked like it had been hammered out on an old typewriter. The ink uneven, some letters hitting harder than others. There was no title, just a numbered list. I read them, and as I read them, the silence in the cabin seemed to get a little heavier. The normal sounds of the house, the refrigerator humming, the floorboards settling, seemed to pause. Rule number 1. Do not go out on patrol without a canine partner. If the dog refuses to go down a certain trail, you do not go down that trail. No exceptions. Rule number 2. If you see a staircase in the woods, do not touch it. Do not climb it. Do not investigate it. Ignore it, turn around, and walk away. Rule number 3. If you hear someone screaming for help, and it sounds like it is coming from all directions at once, put on your noise-canceling headphones immediately and radio bass. Do not respond vocally. Rule number 4. You will see lights in the trees at night. They will look like flashlights or camping lanterns. If they are stationary, you can proceed. If they blink in a pattern, turn off your own light and stay perfectly still until they pass. Rule number 5. If you encounter a man in a red flannel shirt with his back to you, standing off the trail, do not approach him. Do not ask him if he needs help. Walk past him, keep your eyes on the path, and do not look back. If you hear footsteps following you, do not run. Just keep walking. Rule number 6. There are no deer in Sector 4. If you see a deer in Sector 4, check its eyes. If they are front-facing like a predator's, you are already too close. Rule number 7. Sometimes, the radio will pick up static that sounds like a conversation between two people you know. It might sound like me or your parents or a friend. Do not listen to the conversation. Turn the radio off for 2 minutes. If you listen for too long, you will start to agree with them. I sat there for a long time staring at the list. It was ridiculous. Front-facing eyes on a deer. Staircases in the middle of nowhere. It had to be a creative writing project Miller or one of the other guys had come up with to spook the city kid. When Miller came back in, I tried to smile. I tried to make a joke about the stairs. "What, are we talking spiral staircases or escalators?" I asked. Miller didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just took the paper from my hand, folded it back up, and shoved it into my shirt pocket. "You keep that on you," he said. "And I hope to God you think it's funny forever. Because the day you stop laughing is the day you realize how much trouble we're actually in." The first few weeks were agonizingly normal. That's the part that really messes with your head. If I had walked out on day one and seen a monster, I would have quit and left. But nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. My shifts were mundane. I'd wake up in the bunkhouse, the morning light filtering through the dust on the windows, making the room look soft and inviting. I'd drink coffee, check the weather reports, and head out for routine patrols. The mountains were breathtaking. The leaves were turning vibrant shades of crimson and gold. The air was fresh. I spent hours hiking well-marked trails, checking for washouts, clearing fallen branches, and saying hello to the occasional hiker. It was just a job, a physically demanding, scenic job. I started to let my guard down. I started to resent the rules. They felt childish. I'd be walking my patrol loop, my German Shepherd partner, Buster, trotting happily beside me, and I'd think about how silly I was for checking my pocket to make sure the list was still there. I felt foolish for scanning the woods for random staircases. It was just nature, just trees, rocks, and dirt. But there was this subtle isolation that started to creep in. It wasn't obvious at first. It was in the quiet moments. You know how when you're in a city, silence is never really silence? There's always a hum, a distant car, an air conditioner, the electricity in the wires. But out there, deep in the woods, the silence is absolute. It's heavy. It feels like a physical weight pressing against your eardrums. Sometimes, I'd stop to tie my boot, and the silence would rush in so fast it made me dizzy. I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that primal feeling of being watched. I'd spin around, expecting to see a bear or a cougar, but there would be nothing. Just the endless rows of trees, standing like silent sentinels. Just the shadows stretching out as the sun dipped lower. The lighting in the woods plays tricks on you. That's what I told myself. It's called pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns where there are none. Seeing faces in the bark, seeing shapes in the brush. It's a survival instinct. It's normal. One afternoon, about 3 weeks in, the deceptive calm began to crack. Just a hairline fracture. I was on a ridge in Sector 2. It was a beautiful day, clear blue sky, the sun warm on my back. I was eating a sandwich on a rock outcrop, looking out over the valley. Buster was sniffing around a blueberry bush nearby. It was idyllic. The kind of moment you take a picture of to show your friends back home so they get jealous of your life. Then Buster stopped. It wasn't a gradual stop. He froze, mid-step, one paw raised. His ears swiveled forward, and a low, guttural growl started in his throat. It wasn't his "I see a squirrel" growl. It was deep, vicious. "What is it, boy?" I asked, putting my sandwich down. The vibe shifted instantly. The sunlight seemed to get a little colder. The ambient bird song that I hadn't even realized was there suddenly cut out. The woods went dead silent. Buster was staring at a patch of dense rhododendron thicket about 50 yards down the slope. Nothing was moving. There was no wind. I stood up, hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone there?" My voice sounded flat, absorbed instantly by the trees. No echo. Buster backed up, pressing his body against my legs. He was trembling. This was a dog trained to find people in snowstorms, a dog that had chased off coyotes. And he was shaking. I squinted at the thicket. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw color. Not the green of the leaves or the brown of the trunks. A flash of bright, synthetic red. Like flannel. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rule number 5 flashed in my mind. If you encounter a man in a red flannel shirt, I blinked, and it was gone. Just leaves. Just shadows. "Come on, Buster," I whispered. My voice was shaking. "Let's go." We didn't finish the patrol loop. I turned us around and hiked back to the station at a pace that was just shy of a run. I kept looking over my shoulder. I kept listening. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. When I got back to the station, it was evening. The warm, yellow lights of the cabin were on. Miller was in the kitchen reading a paperback. He looked up as I burst in, sweating and pale. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why I was back early. He just looked at me, then looked at the dog, who was still whining softly. "Coffee's fresh," Miller said, turning a page in his book. I poured a cup, my hands shaking so bad I spilled some on the counter. The cabin felt safe, felt normal, but the feeling of the woods was still clinging to me, like a cold film on my skin. I sat down, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. I think I saw something," I said, breaking the silence. Miller paused. He marked his page and closed the book. "Did you acknowledge it?" "No," I said. "I just left." "Good," he said. "Did you look back?" I checked behind me a few times. Miller sighed, a long, weary sound. "Don't look back, Alex. Things out here, they take an invitation however they can get it. Looking back tells them you're interested." He stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the gathering dark. The reflection of the room made it hard to see out, but he stared anyway. "The first month is the hardest," he said softly, "because your brain is still trying to apply logic to a place that doesn't have any. You're trying to make sense of it. You think you're tired or dehydrated or stressed. You think the rules are a game." He turned to face me, and his face was grim in the ambient light. "But now you know. You felt it, didn't you? The static." I nodded. I had felt it. A static in the air, a pressure that made my teeth ache. "Get some sleep," Miller said, "and lock your window. Not because of burglars. Just lock it." I went to my bunk. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling. The house settled around me. Creaks, groans, the wind brushing against the siding. Normal sounds. But now every sound was a question. Was that a branch scratching the glass? Or was it a fingernail? Was that the wind howling? Or was it a scream from all directions at once? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled list. I read it again. Under the soft glow of my reading light, the words seemed to dig into the paper. Rule number 2. If you see a staircase in the woods, I turned off the light. The darkness of the room was total. The isolation was absolute. I was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by millions of acres of ancient, silent forest. And for the first time, I realized that the calm wasn't just deceptive. It was predatory. It was the stillness of a spider waiting in a web. And I was just a fly that had landed right in the center. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, trying to convince myself that the red flash was just a trick of the light. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it, faintly, so faintly I almost missed it. Whistling. It was coming from outside, drifting in through the walls. A slow, melodic tune, jaunty, cheerful, the kind of tune someone whistles when they're taking a stroll. I lay frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I waited for it to fade, for the hiker to pass by on the road. But the road was a mile away, and it was 2 a.m. The whistling didn't fade. It stopped, right outside my window. I remembered Miller's voice. "Lock your window." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the curtain, knowing that on the other side of that thin pane of glass, something was standing there. Something that knew I was awake. Something that knew I had read the rules. The deceptive calm was over. The real job had just begun. You think you know silence until you are 20 miles deep in the Appalachian wilderness. It is not the absence of sound. It is something heavier, something that presses against your eardrums like deep water. It has a weight to it, a texture. Most people, the tourists and the day hikers, they never really hear it. They have the crunch of their own boots, the rustle of their nylon jackets, the chatter of their friends. But when you do this job, when you are out here alone, scanning a grid for a missing kid or a wandered-off senior citizen, you learn to listen to the silence. And that is when you realize that the woods are never truly quiet. They are holding their breath. I have been a search and rescue officer for this district for about 8 months. Before this, I was out west working the high desert. That was dangerous terrain, sure. You had dehydration, flash floods, rattlesnakes. The threats were physical. They were tangible. You could see them coming from a mile away if you knew where to look. But out here, in these ancient, rolling mountains, the threats are different. The geography itself feels hostile, like the topography is constantly shifting when you look away. The canopy is so dense that even at noon, you are walking in a sort of twilight. And the shadows here have a life of their own. When I first transferred, my superior, a guy named Miller who looks like he was carved out of the granite bedrock itself, sat me down. He didn't give me an orientation on the trails or the local fauna. He slid a laminated sheet of paper across his desk. It looked old, coffee-stained, the corners peeling. It was a list of rules, not official protocol, not the standard operating procedures I learned at the academy. These were different, specific, bizarre. Rule number 1. Never carry a mirror into the deep woods. Rule number 2. If you smell copper where there is no machinery, turn back immediately. Rule number 4. If you see a staircase in the woods, do not look at it. Do not climb it. Walk away and never speak of its location. I laughed. I honestly thought it was a hazing ritual. The new guy gets the spooky list. Everyone has a beer and a laugh later. Miller didn't laugh. He just stared at me with these watery, tired eyes and told me to memorize it. So I did purely to humor him. I shoved that list into the back of my mind and focused on the job. I'm a rational guy. I believe in maps, compasses, and topography. I believe in cause and effect. I didn't believe in ghost stories. Not until last Tuesday. It was late afternoon. I was sweeping Sector 4, a dense patch of forest that locals call the Tangle. It's rough terrain, full of thickets and steep ravines that drop off into nowhere. We had a report of a missing hiker, a guy who went off-trail to take photos and never came back to his car. Standard stuff. I had been hiking for about 6 hours, grid-searching back and forth. My legs were burning, the good kind of burn that tells you you're working. The lighting started to change around 5 p.m. This is the time photographers call the golden hour, but in the deep Appalachians, it is something else entirely. The sun dips below the highest ridge lines, and the light doesn't just fade. It changes quality. It turns thick, amber, and heavy. It filters through the leaves in shafts that look solid enough to lean on. But down where I was, in the gullies, the gold was already gone. The shadows were beginning to lengthen, stretching out from the base of the trees like dark, skeletal fingers grasping for my boots. The contrast was messing with my depth perception. Roots looked like snakes. Rocks looked like hunched figures. I checked my watch, calculating how much daylight I had left before I needed to pop a flare or set up a bivouac. I had maybe an hour of usable light. I decided to push just a little further, up a slight incline toward a small plateau that overlooked the ravine. If the hiker had fallen, that was a likely spot. I adjusted my pack, took a sip of lukewarm water, and started the climb. That was when the shift happened. It wasn't gradual. It was instant. 1 second, I was listening to the ambient noise of the forest. The chitter of squirrels, the distant call of a crow, the wind moving through the upper canopy. The next second, it was gone. All of it. It was like someone had severed the audio cable to the world. The wind died. The birds stopped. Even the dry leaves under my boots seemed to stop crunching. Or maybe I just couldn't hear them over the sudden, roaring rush of blood in my own ears. I stopped dead in my tracks. My hand instinctively went to the radio on my shoulder strap. This is something they don't teach you in manuals, but you learn it fast. When the woods go silent, a predator is nearby. A cougar, a bear, something big enough to scare the rest of the ecosystem into hiding. I scanned the tree line, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was looking for fur, for movement, for the shine of eyes in the underbrush. But there was nothing, just the trees, endless, repetitive trunks of oak and pine, standing like silent sentinels. The silence was suffocating. It felt pressurized, like the air pressure had dropped 10 degrees in a second. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that primal, lizard brain warning system that tells you you are being watched. Not by an animal, by something else. I turned a slow circle, checking my 6. Nothing, just the fading light and the growing shadows. I told myself to get a grip. It was just a lull in the wind, just a coincidence. I turned back to the incline and kept walking, but my steps were tentative now. I was walking on eggshells. I crested the ridge and stepped onto the plateau. It was a small clearing, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by a wall of dense rhododendrons. The light here was strange, dim, gray, almost drained of color, even though the sky above was still holding onto the last of the sunset. And there, in the dead center of the clearing, I saw it. My brain tried to reject it at first. It tried to interpret the shape as something natural. Fallen tree, a weird rock formation, a trick of the light. But the geometry was too perfect. The lines were too straight. It was a staircase. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. A jagged lump of panic. I remembered the list. Rule number 4. If you see a staircase in the woods, do not look at it. But I was looking at it. Couldn't look away. It was impossibly out of place, like a glitch in a video game. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't some crumbling stone foundation from an old settler's cabin, covered in moss and ivy. I've seen those. Those make sense. History rots. Nature reclaims. This was different. It was a pristine, freestanding staircase. It looked like someone had taken a chainsaw to a wealthy suburban home, cut out the stairs, and dropped them here by helicopter. It was made of polished cherry wood, the varnish gleaming even in the dying light. The banister was smooth, intricate, curving elegantly at the bottom. There was carpet running down the center of the steps. A plush, cream-colored runner, held in place by shiny brass rods. It was spotless. There wasn't a single leaf on it. No bird droppings. No dirt. It was immaculate, sitting on the forest floor, surrounded by rotting leaves and mud. I stood there, maybe 20 yards away, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. A prank? An art installation? Some rich guy building a house who started with the stairs? But there were no construction materials, no tire tracks, no cleared brush. The trees grew tight around it, undisturbed. The staircase just rose up from the dirt, leading to absolutely nowhere. It went up about 12 steps and then just ended in the empty air. The fear that washed over me wasn't the adrenaline spike of seeing a bear. It was something colder. It was a deep, nausea-inducing wrongness. It was the feeling of seeing something that violates the laws of physics. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run back down the ridge, radio for extraction, and get the hell out of Sector 4. But I felt a pull, a physical, magnetic pull toward the structure. It wasn't a voice in my head, nothing that cliché. It was curiosity weaponized. It was the urge to jump when you stand on a cliff edge. Just go look, my brain whispered. Just touch the banister. See if it's real. I took a step forward, then another. The silence was so loud now it was ringing, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The shadows around the clearing seemed to be leaning in, watching. As I got closer, I noticed something else. The smell. The forest usually smells like pine resin, damp earth, and decaying vegetation. But within 10 feet of the stairs, the smell changed. It smelled like ozone, like the air before a thunderstorm, mixed with something synthetic. Old perfume? Cleaning chemicals? I couldn't place it, but it smelled like the inside of a house that had been closed up for 50 years. I stopped about 5 feet from the bottom step. The craftsmanship was incredible. I could see the grain in the wood. I could see the individual fibers of the carpet runner. It looked soft. "Don't climb it," Miller's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't look at it." I was breaking the rules. I was staring right at it. I looked up the steps, following the runner to the top where it abruptly cut off into the gray twilight air. And for a split second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, I thought I saw something. At the top of the stairs, where the landing should have been, the air shimmered, like heat haze on a highway in July. It distorted the trees behind it. And in that distortion, I saw a shape. A shadow. Not a shadow cast by the sun, but a shadow standing upright. It was just a flicker. I blinked, and it was gone. but the feeling of being observed intensified 1,000 times over. I wasn't just being watched by the woods anymore. I was being watched by the stairs. A sound broke the silence. Creak came from the structure. It was the distinct, heavy groan of a wooden step taking weight. It sounded like someone had just taken a step down from the top. My blood turned to ice water. There was no one there. I was staring right at it. The stairs were empty. Creak. Another step. Closer. Lower. The invisible weight was descending. The carpet didn't depress. The wood didn't bow. But the sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of footsteps coming downstairs to greet a guest. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Panic, raw and animalistic, finally seized control of my motor functions. The rational part of my brain that wanted to investigate shut down completely. The survival instinct took the wheel. I didn't turn my back. I didn't run. I remembered enough of my training to know you never run from a predator. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the staircase, my hands trembling as I reached for my bear spray, though I knew with terrifying certainty that pepper spray wouldn't do a damn thing against this. Creak. A third step. It was halfway down now. I backed into the rhododendrons, the branches scratching at my face and arms, but I didn't feel the pain. I just needed to put distance between me and that thing. The smell of ozone was getting stronger, choking me, tasting like copper in the back of my throat. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but caught myself. I scrambled backward, finally cresting the ridge and dropping back down the incline, breaking the line of sight. The moment the stairs disappeared from my view, the sound returned. All at once, the wind roared back into the canopy. A crow cawed loudly, startling me so bad I nearly screamed. The leaves crunched under my boots. The world rushed back in, loud and chaotic and normal. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, my chest heaving. I looked at my watch. It was 5:15 p.m. I had been up there for maybe 10 minutes. But looking at the sky, the light was wrong. It was darker than it should have been. The sun was completely gone. The heavy purple bruising of dusk had taken over the sky entirely. I scrambled to my feet. I didn't care about the grid anymore. I didn't care about the protocol. I pulled my radio from my shoulder strap, my fingers shaking so hard I dropped it once before keying the mic. "Base, this is Unit for Alpha," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy, barely recognizable to my own ears. I'm aborting the search for the day, losing light, heading back to the trailhead." There was a pause of static, and then Miller's voice came through. Not the dispatcher. "Miller. For Alpha, copy that," Miller said. His voice was flat, serious. "Alex, what is your location?" I'm near the north ridge of the Tangle," I stammered. Another pause, longer this time. "Did you see it?" Miller asked. He didn't specify what it was. He didn't have to. The static on the radio seemed to hiss in a rhythm, like breathing. I hesitated. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I saw a bear, or I twisted my ankle. But the image of that pristine cherry wood banister was burned into my retinas. I saw a structure, Miller. I saw stairs. The radio went silent for 10 seconds. I thought I lost the signal. "Copy," Miller said finally. "Do not acknowledge it again. Do not go back to check your coordinates. Get to the vehicle. Lock the doors. Wait for me. I'm coming to get you." "Miller, I can hike out, I'm fine," I lied. "Stay in the vehicle, Alex," Miller's voice cracked, losing its composure for the first time since I'd met him. "And for God's sake, if you hear anything calling your name from the tree line behind you, do not turn around." The radio clicked off. I stood there in the darkening woods, the temperature dropping rapidly. The shadows were now absolute, merging into a single wall of black. And from the top of the ridge, back where the clearing was, back where the stairs were waiting, I heard a sound. It wasn't a creak this time. It was a whistle, a low, melodic whistle, the kind you'd use to call a dog, or get someone's attention. It drifted down the hill, weaving through the trees, carrying that scent of ozone and old dust. I turned and ran. I didn't walk. I didn't check my compass. I ran down that mountain with the devil at my heels, tearing through briars and sliding down embankments, the whistle following me, always just a few yards behind, always just out of sight, until the lights of my truck finally broke through the gloom. That was the first anomaly. That was the first time I realized the rules weren't a joke. But as I sat in my locked truck, watching the tree line, waiting for Miller, I knew it wouldn't be the last. Because the whistle hadn't stopped when I reached the clearing. It had just gotten quieter, waiting, and the worst part, the whistle sounded exactly like me.
You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you forget why you went in there? That momentary lapse in reality? Imagine that feeling stretched out over 4 hours, but instead of a living room, you are deep in the jagged spine of the Appalachian wilderness, and instead of forgetting your keys, you feel like you are forgetting how to be human. That is where I was. I was 3 miles off the designated grid, looking for a hiker named Marcus who had vanished 2 days prior. The briefing said he was experienced, prepared, and smart. But the woods do not care if you are smart. The woods do not care if you have a GPS or a flare gun. In the Appalachians, the geography itself feels ancient, like it is tolerating your presence, waiting for you to slip up. The sun had dipped below the ridgeline about an hour ago, and the transition from twilight to night in these mountains is not gradual. It is a guillotine. 1 minute you can see the texture of the bark on the white oaks, and the next you are swimming in ink. I had my shoulder radio clipped to my vest, and the static had been a comfort for the first few hours. It was a tether to the command post, a reminder that civilization existed somewhere beyond these endless trees. But as the darkness truly settled in, the radio went silent. Not just quiet, dead. No static, no white noise, just a heavy plastic brick weighing me down. I remembered the briefing from my training officer, a guy we called Old Miller. He had sat me down on my first day, his face looking like a roadmap of bad memories, and gave me a list of rules that were not in the official handbook. I thought he was hazing the rookie. I thought it was a joke. Rule number 1, if the radio goes dead silent, do not try to fix it. Do not speak into it, just turn it off. Rule number 2, if you see stairs in the woods, do not touch them, do not look at the top, and for the love of God, do not climb them. Rule number 3, if you hear your name, do not answer. I was standing in a ravine, the ground slick with decaying leaves and mud. The air pressure dropped so fast my ears popped. I knew a storm was coming. I could smell it. But mixed in with the scent of ozone and damp earth was something else. It smelled metallic, like old pennies, like copper. My stomach twisted into a knot. I checked my GPS unit. The screen flickered, glowing a pale, sickly green, and then the coordinates started spinning. North became south, east became west. The numbers scrambled like a code breaking apart. I was flying blind. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut a cone through the darkness, illuminating dancing dust motes and the gnarled roots of rhododendrons that looked too much like grasping fingers. I took a step forward, my boot squelching in the mud. That is when I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, right in the center of a small clearing that had no business being there, was a staircase. It was pristine. It looked like it had been cut right out of a suburban house and dropped from the sky. White banister, polished mahogany steps, maybe 12 of them leading up to absolutely nothing, just leading up into the dark air. There were no leaves on it, no dirt. It was immaculately clean. My brain tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe it was dumping, some construction debris left by a lazy contractor. But how would they get a truck out here? There were no roads for miles. The terrain was vertical. I remembered Miller's voice. Do not look at the top. I forced my eyes down to the bottom step. There was something sitting there. A boot. A single, muddy hiking boot. It looked like the brand Marcus was wearing in the missing person photo. My training kicked in. I wanted to rush forward, grab the boot, look for evidence. But the air around those stairs felt heavy. It felt like the air around a high-voltage transformer. The hair on my arms stood up, pushing against the fabric of my uniform. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run back the way I came, but I could not leave the boot. I took a step toward it, then another. Alex. The voice came from behind me. It was a whisper, but it sounded like it was right next to my ear. It was clear, distinct, and terrified. I froze. My hand hovered over the flashlight on my belt. I knew that voice. It sounded like Miller. But Miller was back at base, 10 miles away. Alex, don't look at them. I spun around, swinging the flashlight beam in a wide arc. Trees, bushes, shadows. Nothing. Miller? I called out. My voice cracked. It sounded small, absorbed instantly by the dense canopy. Silence. Then a flash of light. Not lightning. It came from the ground, about 20 feet to my left. It was the harsh, blue-white glow of a smartphone screen lighting up. It was lying face up in the mud. The light was blinding in the pitch black. I squinted, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked toward the phone. I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct I had as a human being, every evolutionary alarm bell, was screaming at me to stay put. But I am a search and rescue officer. If that was Marcus's phone, I needed it. I got closer. The screen was displaying a photo. I could see it clearly now. It was a selfie. It was a picture of me. I stopped breathing. I leaned in closer, the dread pooling in my stomach like ice water. The photo was of me, standing exactly where I was standing right now, looking at the phone. But the angle was from above, from high above. I jerked my head up, shining my light into the branches. Nothing but tangled limbs and black leaves. Then the sky tore open. Lightning struck, not a mile away, but close, deafeningly close. The thunder didn't roll, it crashed like a bomb. For a split second, the entire forest was lit up in stark, strobe light monochrome. In that flash, I saw them. Standing in the woods, surrounding the clearing, were figures, dozens of them. They were standing perfectly still behind the trees, just peeking out. They looked like people. They were wearing flannel shirts, hiking gear, rain jackets, but they were too tall. Their limbs were slightly too long, and their faces. In that single millisecond of electric light, their faces were just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no mouths, just blank slates. Darkness slammed back down instantly. I was blind. The afterimage of the lightning was burned into my retinas, dancing in purple and green spots, masking whatever was really out there. I scrambled backward, slipping on the wet leaves, my hands grasping for purchase. I dropped my flashlight. It rolled away, the beam spinning wildly, illuminating patches of dirt, a tree trunk, the stairs, the dark, the stairs again. The stairs. The flashlight beam landed on the staircase and stopped. There was something at the top of the stairs now. It was a silhouette, a man. He was facing away from me, looking out into the void. He was wearing a red jacket, the same jacket Marcus was wearing when he left the trailhead. "Marcus!" I screamed. I couldn't help it. The terror had uncorked me. The figure at the top of the stairs slowly began to turn. The movement was jerky, mechanical, like a stop-motion animation gone wrong. I scrambled for my flashlight, my fingers digging into the mud. I found the cold metal casing and snatched it up, aiming it at the stairs. Empty. The stairs were empty. The boot at the bottom was gone. Then I heard the sound. It started low, a vibrating hum that I felt in my teeth before I heard it with my ears. It was coming from everywhere at once. It sounded like a choir of children trying to mimic the sound of wind. Whoo, whoo. It wasn't wind. There was no breeze. The air was dead still. I started to back away, keeping the light pointed at the stairs. I needed to put distance between me and that thing. I needed to find the trail. I checked my GPS again. Dead battery. That was impossible. I had put fresh lithium batteries in before I left the truck. I grabbed my radio. "Base, this is Alex. I have a situation. I need a vector. Over." I released the talk button. Static. But then, through the static, a voice cut through. It was crystal clear. "Alex, look at the stairs." It was my own voice. It was a recording of me speaking, but I had never said those words. I threw the radio. I just chucked it into the darkness. I didn't care anymore. Panic was a cold hand squeezing my throat. I turned and ran. Running in the woods at night is suicide. You can break an ankle, gouge an eye out on a branch, fall into a ravine. I knew all this. I didn't care. I ran until my lungs burned, tearing through brambles that ripped at my uniform and skin. I just needed to get away from that clearing, away from the smell of copper. I must have run for 10 minutes, a blind, headlong dash through the undergrowth. I collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak tree, gasping for air, my chest heaving. I tried to listen, to see if I was being followed. The woods were silent again. The humming had stopped. The thunder had moved off into the distance. I huddled there, trying to control my breathing, trying to force my heart rate down. I told myself I was hallucinating. It was stress, dehydration, the low pressure system messing with my inner ear. I took out my water bottle and took a long drink. I splashed some on my face. "Okay, Alex, pull it together. You are a professional. Find a landmark, wait for dawn." I sat there for a moment, letting the darkness settle. I needed to conserve my flashlight battery. I clicked it off. Total darkness enveloped me. I closed my eyes, counting to 10. 1, 2, 3. I heard a twig snap. It was close, maybe 5 feet away. I held my breath. Another snap. Then the sound of fabric rustling against bark. I opened my eyes. I couldn't see anything. It was absolute pitch black. But I could feel heat. Someone or something was standing right in front of me. I could feel body heat radiating toward my face. I smelled it again, copper, and something else, something sweet like rotting fruit. My hand moved to my belt, finding the flashlight. I knew if I turned it on, I would see whatever it was, and I knew, deep down in the lizard part of my brain, that if I saw it, I would never be the same. But I had to know. I clicked the switch. The light didn't work. I clicked it again, frantic now. Click, click, click. Nothing. Then, right in front of my face, in the darkness, a phone screen lit up. It wasn't my phone. It was held by a hand that was pale, dirt-stained, and missing 2 fingernails. The screen was bright, blindingly so. The phone was on a video call. On the screen, I saw myself. I was looking at the camera, my eyes wide with terror, bathed in the blue light of the phone. But the background on the screen wasn't the woods. The background was my own bedroom. I saw my posters on the wall, I saw my bed. And standing behind me on the screen, peering over my shoulder, was the man in the red jacket, Marcus. His face was gone. It was just a smooth surface of bone, but I could hear him. The audio from the phone was on speaker. A raspy, wet voice filled the space between us. "You found me, Alex." The phone went black. I screamed. I didn't mean to, but the sound ripped out of my throat. I pushed off the tree and scrambled sideways, crawling on my hands and knees through the mud. I didn't know which way was north or south anymore. I just knew I had to move. I hit a slope and slid, tumbling down an embankment, crashing through ferns and hitting rocks. I rolled until I hit the bottom of a gully, landing hard in a shallow stream. The cold water shocked my system. I lay there, shivering, staring up at the canopy. The storm clouds were breaking apart slightly, letting a tiny amount of moonlight filter through. I saw where I was. I was in a clearing, and 10 yards away from me, rising out of the mud, pristine and white, were the stairs. I hadn't run away. I had run in a circle. Or the stairs had moved. I couldn't move. My legs refused to work. I watched as a light appeared at the top of the stairs. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a lantern, an old-fashioned oil lantern. Someone picked it up. A figure stepped to the edge of the top step. He held the lantern high. It was old Miller. But Miller looked wrong. He was wearing his uniform from 30 years ago. He looked young. He looked down at me, huddled in the stream. He didn't speak. He just raised a finger to his lips. Shh. Then he pointed. Not at me. He pointed behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I knew the rule. If you hear something behind you, don't turn around. But Miller was pointing. I turned my head slowly. In the stream, half submerged in the water, was a face. It was huge. It was the size of a car hood, just a pale, flat face resting in the water, staring up at the sky. It had no body, just a giant face. Its eyes opened. They were completely black. It opened its mouth, and the sound of the radio static poured out, loud and screeching. "Alex! Alex! Alex!" I scrambled back, splashing through the water, clawing up the muddy bank toward the stairs. It was insanity. I was running toward the thing I was supposed to avoid to get away from the thing that shouldn't exist. I reached the bottom step. My hand touched the polished wood of the banister. It felt warm. It felt like skin. I looked up. Miller was gone. The lantern was sitting on the top step, burning brightly. I had a choice: stay in the dark with the giant face in the water, or climb the stairs into the unknown. The static grew louder. The trees around the clearing began to shake violently, as if a massive unseen hand was shaking them. Leaves rained down. I put my foot on the first step. Solid. It felt like a real house. I took another step. The static stopped instantly. The wind stopped. The shaking stopped. I was standing on the third step. The silence was deafening. I looked back down at the clearing. It was gone. I don't mean it was dark. I mean, it was gone. Below the third step, there was nothing but a gray, swirling mist. No ground, no stream, no woods, just void. I looked up. The stairs continued upward, fading into the darkness above. But now I could see something else. Doors. Freestanding doors floating in the blackness on either side of the staircase. Hundreds of them. Some were open, some were closed. From one of the open doors, a few steps up and to the right, I heard a sound. It was the sound of a TV, a commercial jingle, and the smell of frying bacon. It was the smell of home. "Alex, dinner's ready." It was my mother's voice, my mother who had passed away 5 years ago. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. This was the trap. This was how they got you. Miller had said it. They use what you love. They use what you miss. "Alex, honey, come inside. It's cold out there." The door was right there. I could see warm yellow light spilling out of it. I could see the edge of the kitchen table. I was shivering, wet, terrified, and alone. The warmth looked so real. But then I saw the hand resting on the doorframe. It looked like my mother's hand. Same ring, same wrist. But the fingers, there were too many of them. I counted 6, 7, 8 fingers drumming on the wood. I squeezed my eyes shut. "It's not real," I whispered. "It's not real. It's not real." "Don't be rude, Alex," the voice said. And suddenly, it wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It was deep, guttural, and vibrating with malice. "Come inside." I lunged upward, taking the steps 2 at a time, ignoring the door, ignoring the light. I ran up the stairs toward the lantern at the top. The door slammed shut behind me with a sound like a gunshot. I kept climbing. The stairs seemed to stretch on forever. My legs burned. My lungs screamed. Finally, I reached the top landing. It was a small, square platform of wood. In the center sat the lantern, and next to the lantern was a backpack. Marcus's backpack. I fell to my knees, gasping. I reached out and touched the canvas of the pack. It was real. It was solid. I opened the top flap. Inside, there was no survival gear, no food, no water. It was filled with teeth. Thousands of human teeth, loose, rattling around in the bottom of the bag. I recoiled, knocking the lantern over. The flame sputtered. The shadows on the platform lengthened, stretching out, taking form. And then the light went out. I was alone in the dark, suspended in the air, holding a bag of teeth with nowhere to go but down. And from the darkness right in front of my face, a match struck. The flare of the match illuminated a face inches from mine. It was Marcus. He was smiling, but his mouth was sewn shut. The match burned down to his fingertips. He didn't flinch. "You broke the rules, Alex," a voice said from the dark. The match went out. I never understood what true darkness was until that night. You think you know dark? You think you know the absence of light because you've turned off a lamp in your bedroom or walked down a suburban street during a power outage? That isn't darkness. That is just a dimmer switch turned low. The darkness in the deep Appalachians, 5 miles off the trail, in a sector we call the dead zone, is a physical weight. It presses against your eyes. It fills your mouth like potting soil. And when you are out there, alone, with a radio that is spitting nothing but static and a flashlight that is starting to flicker, the darkness feels less like an empty space and more like a stomach that you have been swallowed into. I was looking for the kid. That was the job. A 22-year-old hiker named Marcus who had wandered off the ridgeline. But I knew, deep down in the pit of my gut, that I wasn't looking for Marcus anymore. I was looking for a way out. I had broken the third rule. Everyone who joins the search and rescue team gets the list. It's typed on a laminated card tucked into the visor of the Jeep. Most rookies laugh at it. They think it's a hazing ritual. Rule number 1, don't go out alone after a storm. Rule number 2, never look into the canopy if the birds stop singing. And rule number 3, if you see a light that doesn't cast a beam, turn around and walk until your legs burn. Do not run, just walk. I had seen the light. It was a pale, hovering luminescence, bobbing between the hemlocks like a lantern held by an invisible hand. And like a fool, like a rookie, I had followed it. I thought it was Marcus. I thought it was his phone screen or a headlamp. But as I scrambled down the ravine, sliding on wet pine needles and decaying leaves, the light vanished, and the silence fell. Not the quiet of the woods, the silence of a vacuum. No crickets, no wind, just the blood rushing in my ears, loud as a whitewater rapid. Click. My heavy-duty tactical flashlight, a mag light that could double as a club, flickered. It didn't dim, it cut out completely. I froze. The air around me dropped 10 degrees in a second. The smell hit me then. It wasn't the smell of pine or mud. It was the smell of copper, like a handful of old pennies or fresh blood mixed with the sharp tang of ozone. Click. My heavy-duty tactical flashlight, a mag light that could double as a club, flickered. It didn't dim, it cut out completely. I froze. The air around me dropped 10 degrees in a second. The smell hit me then. It wasn't the smell of pine or mud. It was the smell of copper, like a handful of old pennies or fresh blood mixed with the sharp tang of ozone. It's the smell of a thunderstorm right before the lightning strikes you. I gave the flashlight a hard smack against my palm. The beam shot back out, cutting a stark white cone through the blackness. And that's when I saw it. 30 yards away, standing perfectly still between 2 ancient oaks. It looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. That's the only way I can describe it without sounding insane. It was wearing a flannel shirt, red and black plaid, identical to the description of what Marcus was wearing. But the shirt was stretched, the torso was too long, the arms hung down past the knees, and the head was tilted at a 90-degree angle, resting almost flat against the shoulder, as if the neck had been snapped like a dry twig. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My training screamed at me to call out, to identify myself as search and rescue. But the instinct, the primal lizard brain that kept our ancestors alive when saber-toothed cats hunted them, screamed something else. It screamed predator. Then the light flickered again. Strobe. On. Off. On. Off. In the brief nanosecond of darkness, I heard a sound, a wet slap against the leaves. The light flashed back on. The thing was closer, 10 yards closer. It hadn't walked, it hadn't run. It had just displaced. 1 second it was by the oaks, the next it was standing in the open clearing. The head was still snapped to the side, but now I could see the face. There was no face. It wasn't a blank slate, it was worse. It was a blur, like a smudge on a photograph, like the features had been erased by a wet thumb. Where eyes should have been, there were just shallow depressions in the pale, doughy skin. And where a mouth should have been, there was just a smooth patch of flesh. But it spoke. The sound didn't come from the creature. It came from everywhere. It vibrated in my teeth. It sounded exactly like my captain, Miller. Alex, stop messing around. Come back to base. It was a perfect recording. The cadence, the gravel in the voice, the slight southern drawl. But Miller was 5 miles away at the command post. And Miller didn't sound this flat. There was no emotion behind the words. It was audio mimicry, a parrot repeating a sound it didn't understand. I stumbled backward. My boot caught a root and I went down hard, the flashlight spinning out of my hand. The beam spun wildly, creating a chaotic, nauseating light show. The trees seemed to stretch and twist as the shadows elongated and snapped back. I scrambled for the light. My fingers brushed the cold metal casing. I grabbed it and whipped it up, aiming it like a weapon. It was right over me. The thing towered above me, 7 feet tall if it was an inch. The smell of copper and ozone was overpowering, making me gag. In the harsh, erratic light of the dying flashlight, I saw the smooth skin of its face ripple. It was trying to form features. A slit opened where the mouth should be. A vertical slit, not horizontal. It opened with a sound like tearing wet leather. Alex, help me. Now it sounded like Marcus. It was the voice of the missing kid, pleading, terrified. I kicked out. My boot connected with its shin. It felt like kicking a concrete pillar wrapped in wet rubber. There was no give. The creature didn't even flinch. It just loomed closer, that vertical maw widening to reveal nothing. Just darkness, a darkness deeper than the woods. I remembered rule number 4, a rule I had never had to use, a rule that Miller had whispered to me one night over beers, a look of haunted terror in his eyes. Rule number 4, if it knows your name, do not speak, do not scream, deny it your voice. I clamped my mouth shut. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted my own blood. The pain was sharp and grounding. I focused on it. I scrambled backward on my elbows, kicking up dirt and leaves, trying to put distance between us. The flashlight strobed again, rapid fire now. Flash, flash, flash. Every time the light hit the creature, it was in a different pose. Flash, it was reaching for me. Flash, it was crouched like a spider. Flash, it was standing tall, arms spread wide in a mocking embrace. It was toying with me. It moved in the dark intervals. It was testing my sanity. I managed to get to my feet. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the terrain anymore. I didn't care about twisting an ankle or falling off a ledge. I just needed to be away. I sprinted through the undergrowth, branches whipping my face, opening cuts on my cheeks and forehead. I didn't feel them. The adrenaline dumped into my system was so potent, I felt like I was vibrating. Behind me, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of pursuit. It wasn't footsteps. It sounded like heavy sacks of meat being thrown against the trees. Thud, thud, thud. And the voices, a chorus of them now. Alex, officer, help me. Mom, is anyone out there? It was cycling through everything it had heard. Every hiker, every lost child, every SAR officer who had ever shouted into these woods. It was a library of the lost, and it was getting closer. The trees were blurring past me. The flashlight beam bounced erratically, illuminating glimpses of the nightmare forest. A twisted root that looked like a claw, a hollow in a tree that looked like a screaming mouth. The topography didn't make sense anymore. I was running uphill, but the ground felt like it was tilting downward. The gravity felt wrong, heavy. I burst into a small clearing and slammed to a halt. There was a staircase. Right there in the middle of the woods. No house, no ruins, just a pristine white marble staircase rising out of the mulch and ferns, leading up into the empty air. Rule number 6, never climb the stairs. Never touch the stairs. Don't even look at the stairs for too long. But the thing was behind me. I could hear the crashing in the brush. I could smell the ozone. I was trapped. The creature behind me, the forbidden stairs in front of me. The flashlight was dying, for real this time. The beam was fading to a sickly yellow, pulsating weak heartbeat rhythms. I spun around, putting my back to the stairs. I raised the dimming light. The creature emerged from the tree line. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. It didn't step onto the grass. It seemed to hesitate. Why? I looked at the stairs behind me, then back at the thing. It was afraid of the stairs. The creature paced back and forth along the tree line, its movements jerky and unnatural. That vertical mouth was gaping open, letting out a sound like static hissing on a dead radio channel. It wanted me, but it wouldn't cross the threshold of the clearing. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was hyperventilating. My vision was tunneling. "Come here, Alex. It's safe." It used my mother's voice. That broke me. My mother had been dead for 10 years. Hearing her voice, sweet and concerned, coming from that faceless monstrosity, it shattered the wall of panic and replaced it with cold, hot rage. I took a step forward, away from the stairs, toward the thing. "You are not her," I whispered. I broke the rule. I spoke, but I didn't answer it. I denied it. The creature froze. The static hiss stopped. The vertical mouth snapped shut. The depressions where its eyes should be seemed to deepen, drilling into me. The flashlight finally died. Total darkness. I stood there, blind, vulnerable. I waited for the strike. I waited to feel those elongated arms wrap around me. I waited for the snap of my neck. But in the darkness, I heard something else. Not the creature. I heard a whistle. A sharp, shrill whistle, 3 short blasts. The universal distress signal. It was coming from my left, and it sounded real. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like a plastic safety whistle blown by human lungs. I didn't have light. I didn't have a weapon. I only had the sound. I turned my back on where the creature had been. I turned my back on the marble stairs that glowed faintly in the moonlight filtering through the canopy, and I moved toward the whistle. I moved blindly, hands outstretched, feeling the bark of trees, the wet leaves. Behind me, the static rose again, a scream of frustration. An electronic shriek that sounded like a microphone feeding back, amplified 1,000 times. It was painful. It made my teeth ache, but it was stationary. It wasn't following. I stumbled forward, faster now. The whistling came again, closer. "I'm here," I croaked. "Sar, I'm here." A beam of light hit me in the face. I shielded my eyes, flinching. "Alex? Jesus Christ, Alex!" It was Miller. I collapsed. My legs just gave out. I hit the dirt, gasping, clawing at the ground to make sure it was real. "Captain?" "I've got you, son. I've got you." Miller was there, solid, real. He grabbed my vest and hauled me up. He had 2 other officers with him. Their lights were bright, steady, no flickering, no strobing. "Where's the kid?" Miller asked, scanning the woods behind me. "There is no kid," I rasped. It wasn't him." Miller looked at me. He saw the blood on my face. He saw the terror in my eyes that goes beyond shock. He knew. He looked past me, into the darkness where I had come from. He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't ask about the stairs. He just nodded, a grim, tight expression on his face. "All right, we're moving out. Formation tightly packed. Nobody breaks the line." As we walked away, heading back toward the extraction point, I looked back one last time. The clearing was gone. The woods were dense and unbroken. There were no stairs. There was no flannel-clad monster. But way up high, in the branches of an oak tree that we passed, I saw it. A pair of eyes. Not human eyes. Reflective, like a cat's, but red. And they weren't side by side. One was a foot higher than the other. I faced front. I fixed my eyes on Miller's back. I focused on the sound of our boots hitting the trail. I survived the dead zone. I followed the rules, mostly. But I know something now. I know that when you look into the dark and you think you see nothing, it's only because the thing looking back at you knows how to close its eyes. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls against my window, I can still smell that copper and ozone, and I can hear my mother's voice whispering from the shadows of my own apartment. "Alex, come here." I don't sleep without a light anymore, and I never, ever answer. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes after I parked in the driveway. The engine was off, the radio was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling metal and the blood rushing in my own ears. It sounded like the ocean, or maybe like wind rushing through a heavy canopy of trees. I couldn't stop gripping the steering wheel. My knuckles were white, straining against the leather, like if I let go, I'd fall off the face of the earth. I was safe. That's what my brain kept trying to tell me. I was back in civilization. I was parked in front of my apartment complex on a Tuesday morning, but my body didn't believe it. My body was still back there, deep in the brush, dealing with things that don't have names. The sun was coming up. That was the worst part. You expect horror to hide in the dark. You expect the monsters to scurry away when the light hits them. But this morning light, it didn't feel like relief. It was cold, sterile. It washed over the dashboard and the hood of the truck in this pale gray-blue hue that made everything look like a photograph developed wrong. It stripped the color out of the world. The manicured bushes in front of my building, the neighbor's Honda Civic, the stray cat sitting on the dumpster, it all looked fake. It looked like a stage set. Like if I walked up and touched the brick wall of my building, my hand would punch right through paper mache. I finally forced my fingers to uncurl. They were stiff, aching. I grabbed my gear bag from the passenger seat. It smelled like damp earth and pine needles. Usually, I love that smell. It smells like work. It smells like purpose. Today, it smelled like rot. It smelled like something ancient and stagnant that had been disturbed. I slammed the truck door, and the noise echoed too loudly in the quiet morning. I flinched. I actually flinched, looking over my shoulder toward the tree line at the edge of the property. There are no woods here, just a small patch of decorative trees. But for a split second, I saw the pattern of the branches and my heart stopped. I was looking for them. The stairs. I was scanning the horizon for a staircase that shouldn't be there. That's the rule, right? You don't look at them, you don't touch them. But once you know they exist, you can't stop looking for them. Every shadow looks like a riser. Every trick of the light looks like a pristine white banister rising out of the muck. I walked to my front door, my boots heavy on the pavement. I felt heavy, not just tired. I felt like I was carrying an extra 50 pounds of pressure on my shoulders. The atmospheric pressure of the Appalachian deep woods creates this unique kind of silence. It presses in on your eardrums. Coming back to the city, to the suburbs, I usually feel light. Today, the pressure followed me. I fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking, not a little tremble, but a violent, uncontrollable shake. It took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. I got inside, locked the deadbolt, threw the chain, and then leaned my back against the door. I slid down until I hit the floor. I just sat there in my entryway, still wearing my uniform, staring at the living room. Everything was exactly where I left it. The coffee mug on the side table, the throw blanket draped over the couch, the remote control. It was maddeningly normal. How could this room exist in the same universe as the things I saw last night? How could I worry about paying my electric bill or washing my dishes when I knew what was out there walking between the trees? I needed a shower. I needed to scrub the feeling of the woods off my skin. I peeled off my uniform. I put it directly into the washing machine. I didn't want it touching the floor. I didn't want whatever spores or dust or bad luck I'd picked up to transfer to my carpet. I set the water to as hot as I could stand it. The bathroom is a vulnerable place. I think that's why horror movies use it so much. You're naked, you're blind when the soap is in your eyes, and the sound of the water drowns out everything else. Drowns out footsteps, drowns out breathing. I stood under the spray, watching the water swirl down the drain. It was brown at first. Dirt. Just dirt, Alex. It's just dirt. But as I watched the spiral, I started to hear it again. A whistle. Low, melodic, just slightly off key. I froze. The water hammered against my back. I held my breath, straining my ears against the noise of the shower. It wasn't coming from outside. It sounded like it was right on the other side of the shower curtain. I ripped the curtain back. Nothing. Just the steam rising from the tiles. The cold, sterile morning light was filtering through the frosted window, turning the steam into a ghostly fog. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was losing it. That's what the job does to you eventually. The vet, the old guy who trained me, he told me this would happen. He called it the bleed. He said, "Alex, the woods don't stop at the tree line. You bring them home with you. You gotta learn to build a wall in your head." I turned the water off and dried myself in a hurry. The silence of the apartment was worse than the noise. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. The refrigerator humming sounded like a low growl. I went into the kitchen to make coffee, just to have something to do with my hands. I poured the grounds. I poured the water. I pressed the button. The mundane ritual should have grounded me, but as I stood there, waiting for the pot to fill, I looked out the kitchen window. I'm on the 2nd floor. There's a playground across the street. Empty. Swing set moving slightly in the breeze. And then, I saw him. Or it. Standing by the slide. A figure in a red jacket. Just standing there. Facing my building. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, it was just a red trash can. My brain was pattern matching. It was trying to make sense of the trauma. Pareidolia. That's the scientific term. Seeing faces and patterns. But the fear was primal.
It was the kind of fear that tells a gazelle to run before it even sees the lion. I grabbed my coffee and went to the living room. I sat on the couch, but I couldn't relax. My muscles were coiled tight. I kept checking the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to stretch and contract on their own. I knew, logically, that I was exhausted. I had been awake for 24 hours. I had hiked 12 miles through rugged terrain. I had seen what I saw. I tried to turn on the TV, just noise. I needed noise. The local news was on, traffic reports, weather, a story about a cat stuck in a tree. It felt obscene. These people, the news anchors with their bright smiles and perfect hair, they had no idea. They were talking about sunshine and temperatures, while I was thinking about the void. I was thinking about the guy we were looking for, the one we didn't find, the one who vanished in an area where people just vanish. We found his campsite. We found his boots. Who takes off their boots in the middle of the Appalachian wilderness in October? We found his boots, laced together, sitting neatly on a rock. And 10 feet away, we found a staircase, brick, crumbling, leading up into the air, attached to nothing. I didn't look at it. I swear, I didn't look at it directly. I kept my eyes on the ground. I focused on the boot prints, but I felt it. I felt the pull. It's like a magnet in your brain. It whispers to you, just go up. Just see what's at the top. It's a better view. Sitting on my couch, sipping lukewarm coffee, I felt that pull again. Here, in my living room. I felt the urge to climb, to ascend. I closed my eyes, but that was a mistake. Behind my eyelids, the afterimage of the woods was burned in. Twisted roots that looked like fingers. The silence that wasn't silence. I jerked my eyes open. I couldn't sleep, not yet. If I slept, I'd dream, and I knew exactly what I'd dream about. I walked over to the window again. The light had changed. It was brighter now, fully morning. People were starting to leave for work, normal people with normal jobs. I watched a woman walk her golden retriever. The dog stopped, sniffed the air, and looked directly up at my window. It stared at me. It didn't wag its tail. It just stared. Then it whined and tucked its tail between its legs, pulling the woman away. What did it smell on me? Did I smell like the deep woods? Did I smell like ozone and old stone? I stepped back from the glass. I felt exposed. I went around the apartment and closed all the blinds. I created a cave, a safe space. But as the room got darker, the atmosphere shifted. I remember the debriefing at the station earlier. The captain didn't ask many questions. He never does when it involves the weird cases. He just signed the paperwork. He looked at me with those tired, watery eyes and said, "Go home, Alex. Warm up. Don't listen to the wind tonight. Don't listen to the wind." I could hear the wind now, whistling through the seals of my apartment windows, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like voices. Thousands of them, whispering all at once, too fast to understand. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the digital clock. 8:15 a.m. I had to sleep. I had another shift in 12 hours. Search and rescue doesn't stop just because you're scared. People get lost, people get hurt, and someone has to go get them. I lay down, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I felt like a child hiding from monsters. I stared at the ceiling fan, round and round, hypnotic. As my eyes started to get heavy, as the exhaustion finally began to drag me under, I heard it, crystal clear, inside the room. Scritch, scritch, like fingernails on drywall. I stopped breathing. It was coming from the closet door I always keep shut, the closet door that was currently cracked open about an inch. I lay there, paralyzed. The morning light was leaking through the blinds, slicing across the room in dusty beams. One of those beams hit the closet door. Scritch. Alex? It was a whisper. It sounded like my mom. My mom lives 3 states away. Alex, come here. I squeezed my eyes shut. I recited the protocols in my head. Secure the perimeter, assess the situation, establish communication. But the protocols don't work here. The protocols are for the woods. This was my home. This was supposed to be the after, the safe part. But that's the thing about the lingering fear. It teaches you a lesson you never wanted to learn. You can leave the woods, you can drive away, you can scrub your skin until it's raw. But once you've seen the things that don't make sense, once you've felt the gaze of something that has been watching these mountains since before humans had words, you never really leave. You're marked. I rolled over, putting my back to the closet. I covered my head with the pillow. I told myself it was the pipes. I told myself it was the neighbors. I told myself it was a hallucination born of fatigue. But as I drifted into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep, I could still hear it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not from the closet anymore, but from inside the pillow. Right against my ear. Tap, tap, tap. Like something was trying to get in. Or maybe it was already in, and it was the one trapped. I don't know if I'm going back tonight. I say that every time. I say I'm done, I'm quitting, I'll get a job at a desk, I'll sell insurance. But I know I'll go back, because the woods are waiting.
and they hate to be kept waiting. The silence out there is getting louder, and if we don't go out there to find the lost ones, who will? Just, if you're ever hiking in the Appalachians, if you see a staircase in the woods, if you hear your name whispered from the brush, if the woods suddenly go quiet, do me a favor. Don't be brave. Just run and don't look back, because if you look back, you might see what's following you. And believe me, you don't want to bring that home.